Right, so as many of you will no doubt know by now, the crew of the Freedom Flotilla vessel Madleen were attacked by Israel late on Sunday night into Monday morning UK time in international waters some 60 nautical miles off the coast of Gaza, in a move that constitutes a blatant act of piracy. We widely expected something like this to happen, of course, that Israel would seek to stop the vessel, but to choose to break international law to do so is peak arrogance from a nation that figures it really is untouchable. Well, that's not so much turned out to be the case, as it happens, because just a day later their actions have blown up in their faces royally. Not only have the Madleen now become a symbol of the struggle to survive of the Palestinian people, but their capture and detention, due to Israel not thinking things through as perhaps they ought to have done, has become an even larger problem than one small boat carrying a bit of aid to Gaza ever did. By making the Madleen a big international scandal, they've given the Freedom Flotilla coalition everything they wanted. And so in a sense the mission has succeeded far beyond expectations. But it's actually even worse than that for Israel, and they aren't alone in copping some flack over it either. Right, so late at night on June the 8th into the morning of June the 9th, the Israeli Navy committed an act of piracy in international waters as it intercepted and seized the UK-flagged humanitarian vessel Madleen, forcibly detaining its 12-member civilian crew. The vessel was part of the Freedom Flotilla coalition, attempting to deliver humanitarian aid, specifically baby formula, some rice, medical supplies and desalination equipment, a token amount of aid as it was, symbolic to Gaza, amidst what has been months of war, of starvation on the besieged strip. The Madleen was intercepted whilst sailing deep in international waters. This matters. Under international maritime law, specifically the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, a vessel in international waters is under the exclusive jurisdiction of its flag state, in this case, the UK. So the attack by the Israeli Navy, which involved disabling communications, deploying drones to release chemical agents, it's alleged, and boarding the ship with armed forces, is an unmistakable act of state piracy. The vessel posed no threat, no harm. Its mission was entirely peaceful, organised by the Freedom Flotilla coalition to draw attention to the starvation policies imposed on Gaza by attempting to deliver a token amount of vital goods that Israel has denied entrance of for months. Even the small amount the ship carried was too much for Israel to allow to pass. So instead of allowing this peaceful mission to proceed, or at the least just monitoring it diplomatically, Israel instead opted for military aggression. And by doing so, it has violated several core tenets of international law and established treaties. Where they might have been gloating over their success in stopping one small boat and a dozen peace activists as if they've averted some major strike, Israel isn't laughing so much this morning as the fallout is starting to become a little bit more clear. Perhaps the most serious immediate consequence of Israel's actions was the war crimes complaint filed by the Hind Rajab Foundation, the HRF, with the UK's Metropolitan Police War Crimes Unit just yesterday. The HRF named Israel's elite naval unit, Shayatet 13, as well as Vice Admiral David Salama, the commander of Israel's Navy, as the primary perpetrators. The legal complaint accuses those named of violating the Geneva Conventions Act of 1957, especially with regard to obstructing humanitarian relief, breaching the International Criminal Court Act of 2001, under which crimes against humanity and war crimes fall within UK jurisdiction, of contravening Section 134 of the UK Criminal Justice Act of 1988, prohibiting torture and cruel treatment, violating UNCLOS Article 92, which grants full jurisdiction over ships in international waters to the flag state, and ignoring binding ICJ provisional measures from January, March and May of last year that demand unimpeded humanitarian access to Gaza. And the complaint does not stop there either. It calls on British authorities to interview the detained Madleen crew, gather evidence for potential universal jurisdiction prosecution, and issue arrest warrants for Israeli naval officers should they ever enter UK or Allied jurisdictions. So it's no exaggeration to say that Israel may soon face prosecutorial scrutiny from within the UK itself, especially as pressure builds from civil society and international legal observers. And for those thinking that the UK, being as pro-Israel as its leadership is, as pro-Israel as the Met Police itself is seen to be, not least over their actions against pro-Palestine demonstrations in this country and the recent purchase of Israeli sandcats that we've seen used to ill effect in Gaza during the genocide, now here to be used in the UK, it seems. The whole world is now looking at this case due to how Israel have handled it and how the UK handle it, as it's one of their vessels. They have made this story as big as it is. But here also lies one of the most damning indictments of the UK government too. The Madleen sailed under a British flag, which means under international law, its seizure was effectively an attack on British sovereign territory. As a spokesperson for the HRF has stated, the Madleen was British territory, said a spokesperson for the Hind Rajab Foundation. An armed assault, use of chemical agents and kidnapping of civilians aboard a UK ship are not just attacks on international law, they are attacks on the sovereignty of this country. The British government has a binding duty to investigate and act. The Foundation has called for the immediate release of the abductees, warning that continued inaction may set a precedent for further violations against humanitarian efforts. Now, in any other context, the UK government would have demanded immediate release, launched criminal investigations, and potentially retaliated even, either diplomatically or forcefully. Can you imagine, for example, if instead of being Israel being the perpetrators of this piracy, it had been, say, the Houthis of Yemen? Starmer would have been straight to the dressing up box for his military fatigues before you could blink, and would have bombed them for sure, wouldn't he? Instead, as I spoke on yesterday, Whitehall and all legal sign-offs have been bypassed because they would have pointed out the illegality of Israel's actions. And instead, Prime Minister Keir Starmer and Foreign Secretary David Lammy have issued a truly weak-kneed statement describing the seizure as, once again, I'm afraid it's that word, intolerable, and urging Israel to resolve it with restraint and within humanitarian law. Literally no UK main media are covering this at all. We're being intentionally denying news of what our government here in the UK is not doing regarding a British flagship versus Israel here. The thing is, though, that Israel already broke humanitarian law with an act of piracy, so we're past that point now. You've dodged your legal obligations and, frankly, in my view, left yourselves wide open now for prosecution in connection with your failure to uphold international humanitarian law yourselves. And the move that's coming out today, the news that the Foreign Office is telling civil servants that if you can't get on the same page as Starmer and Lammy, you need to resign, or words to that effect, shows this is a mess the UK government is going to make even bigger for itself, by the looks of it. It's certainly a mess Israel has made for itself. The UK has now made itself complicit in as well, and it sends a message out that Britain won't protect British flagged vessels from Israeli attack. By failing to defend the sovereignty of its own flagged vessel and the rights of UK citizens or residents aboard, the UK government has once again shown it will not challenge Israel, even when British law and British sovereignty are flagrantly being violated. Starmer, despite his legal background, his claims to care about international norms, as implied there, has refused to even label this incident a breach of international law. That refusal is telling. We don't miss things like that anymore. It reveals a government more concerned with maintaining its alignment with Tel Aviv than with protecting its own citizens or upholding international law itself. Zionist without equivocation. Starmer said those words. Starmer reminds us of his loyalties time after time, doesn't he? Contrast this with France, who have formally summoned Israel's diplomatic representative and demanded the release of its detained nationals, including the MEP Rima Hassan. Spain, Ireland, Turkey, Brazil and more have condemned Israel in far stronger terms than Britain has, not that that was a particularly high bar to jump. It's more than diplomatic cowardice here. It's a complete abandonment of legal and moral responsibility. Once the Madleen crew were dragged into Tel Aviv, Israel's Interior Ministry offered them an ultimatum. You can sign deportation notices and board flights home, or you can refuse and perhaps face detention. Well, this has turned into another whoops situation for the apartheid state. Yes, they've made it worse for themselves. Spectacularly backfired, in fact. 8 of the 12 detainees, including that French MEP Rima Hassan, literal member of the European Parliament, have refused to sign. They are daring Israel, therefore, to imprison them and thereby intensify the international backlash. An excerpt from Israeli news outlet Kan covering Hassan's stance reads, Israel's public broadcaster Kan is reporting that French-Palestinian member of the European Parliament Rima Hassan has refused to sign deportation papers. According to Kan, Hassan will be taken to a detention facility in the city of Gibeon. In total, Kan said 8 of the Madleen's 12 crew members are refusing to sign the deportation papers, and the 4 who signed will leave Israel on separate flights during the day. Earlier, Suhad Bishara, the legal director at Adala, a Palestinian-run legal centre in Israel representing the detained activists, said some of them may not agree to fly without a legal consultation because the assumption is that they will have to need to sign some documents. In this case, they will be moved to a detention centre in Ramleh, awaiting a tribunal for immigration, Bishara said. Of the 4 who have signed deportation notices, Greta Thunberg was one of these, as she had been pictured on a plane. She has at time of writing just touched back down in Paris, though there are conflicting stories about how willingly some of these individuals have actually signed. Israel faces a massive problem of its own making again here, therefore. If they were to just release the crew, for the sake of covering that notion, it would prove that they had no legal grounds to arrest them to begin with, which, of course, we know they didn't. Israel committed piracy to detain them. They were hostages. They were kidnapped. If they jail them, word is they'll be headed to Given prison in Ramleh. It would simply amplify the PR crisis Israel has created for itself all the more, and would invite even more human rights and legal scrutiny. And if they forcibly deport them, having not signed, that again would violate international law and sovereignty. Every single outcome makes an already really bad problem for Israel even worse, and exposes them as legally weak, morally bankrupt, and politically frightened. Ironically, in stopping the madleen, Israel has guaranteed its success, therefore. And what was originally a small flotilla mission with limited international coverage has become a global headline about illegal blockade and state violence. A legal flashpoint sparking war crimes investigations in London. The Met cannot ignore it. There is far too much focus on this now, and it is yet another moral reckoning that Israel cannot win. The Freedom Flotilla's mission to expose and disrupt Israel's war of starvation on Gaza has been fulfilled not through a rival, but through the aggression Israel has meted out against them, that they have faced along the way. Israel was so afraid of one small boat carrying baby formula that it responded with military action and chemical drones before the vessel had even entered their illegally occupied waters. That is not a sign of strength. It is a symptom of a regime sorely afraid of the truth ever getting out. But let us also not forget the context here. Gaza is not just suffering, it is starving. According to reports from the UN and multiple humanitarian NGOs, over 90% of Gaza's population is now food insecure. People are dying due to hunger and dehydration, injuries and infections that are not healing due to malnourishment. And even the act of trying to get food from the Israeli-run distribution hubs is just as likely to get you killed as well. Israel's deliberate obstruction of aid, destruction of agricultural land and infrastructure, and refusal to allow humanitarian convoys into Gaza is part of a documented war of starvation. The International Court of Justice has already ordered Israel to cease obstructing aid, a directive Israel continues to ignore. The madleen was carrying the very supplies Israel would not allow through its land crossings. That Israel chose to intercept these supplies, small as they were, at sea, confirms what many have argued for months. This is not about security, it is about domination. It is genocide. Zionism, as it stands, is now exposed not just as a colonial ideology, but as a system incapable of confronting peaceful dissent. A state confident in its legality and morality does not run away from baby formula. Israel's seizure of the madleen was supposed to send a message. Dissent will not be tolerated, and even unarmed humanitarian missions must be crushed. Instead, it sent an entirely different message to the world, one that shows that Zionism is so fragile it cannot allow a single aid ship to sail unimpeded, that international law is not dead but must be enforced, and that resistance in the face of injustice, even by 12 people in a boat, can really rattle an entire state apparatus. The UK now faces its own reckoning, of course, though. Will it fulfil its legal obligations, enforce international law, and protect its own citizens and flagged vessels? Or will it continue to cower behind platitudes whilst war crimes unfold before its eyes? Such a government does not speak for me, and it's very much the direction Starmer appears to be taking things. For every person watching, reading, or learning about the madleen, now is a time to act for you too. Demand accountability from your elected officials. Demand from your MP information about what the government is going to do about its flagged vessel being attacked, other than just calling it intolerable. Support the legal efforts to prosecute war criminals. Donate to the HRF if you can afford to, so they can continue their prosecutions of Israeli war criminals wherever they hide. And amplify the voices of the madleen crew and the starving people of Gaza because they refuse to be silenced. We need to refuse to be silent too, because in silence lies complicity. The battle for Gaza is not just being fought with bombs or with aid, it's being fought with truth. And for now, that truth has got a name, and it is a name that needs to haunt Israel because they're really afraid of it. It's called madleen. For more on the fury and immediate aftermath of the crew's capture and the excuses the British government were readying to make, check out this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, sort of spreading the word and helping to support the channel at the same time, which is very much appreciated. holding power to account for ordinary working class people. And I will hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.